Good morning. The Judiciary Committee will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 1428 for purposes of markup and move that the committee report the bill favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 1428, to extend Privacy Act remedies to citizens of certified states and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I'll begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. I'd like to begin by thanking Mr. Sensenbrenner and Ranking Member Conyers for introducing this important bipartisan legislation to help ensure that the flow of law enforcement information between the European Union and the United States continues unimpeded. In recent years, several broad and highly publicized leaks of classified U.S. intelligence information have eroded the global public's trust in the United States government and our technology sector. As a result, both the federal government and U.S. businesses that operate overseas are facing growing challenges from proposals to limit international flow of data. Our allies in Europe, in particular, are concerned that the European public will no longer support law enforcement cooperation with U.S. authorities if we do not enact legislation to restore their public's trust in U.S. privacy protections. Moreover, American businesses across all sectors face negative commercial consequences abroad as a result of the climate that has been created by the unauthorized disclosure of classified data. H.R. 1428, the Judicial Redress Act, can go a long way toward restoring our allies' faith in U.S. data privacy protections and helping facilitate agreements such as the Data Protection and Privacy Agreement that strengthen privacy interests. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the Judicial Redress Act is critical to reestablishing a trusting relationship between the European Union and the United States, to ensuring continued strong law enforcement cooperation between the United States and Europe, and to preserving the ability of American companies to do business internationally. The Judicial Redress Act accomplishes this by granting citizens of designated foreign countries a limited number of civil remedies against the federal government, similar to those already provided U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents under the Privacy Act. This legislation is narrowly tailored in that it only applies with respect to information obtained through international law enforcement channels, and that any lawsuit brought pursuant to this bill is subject to the same terms and restrictions that apply to U.S. citizens and lawful permanent residents under the Privacy Act. If this legislation is enacted, citizens of designated foreign governments will be able to sue the United States in federal district court with respect to intentional and willful public disclosures of law enforcement information by the federal government that injure those citizens. Additionally, for information that is not subject to an exemption under the Privacy Act, covered foreign citizens will be able to seek redress for failures by the federal government to grant access to records or to amend incorrect records. American citizens are already afforded these types of judicial redress rights in many foreign countries. Although these may be limited civil remedies against the United States government, they will provide European citizens with the core benefits of the Privacy Act, and in doing so will greatly help to restore public trust necessary for the continued success of our law enforcement cooperation with Europe. The bill will also facilitate adoption of the Data Protection and Privacy Agreement and promote a healthy environment for U.S. companies that do business overseas. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation. And now it's my pleasure to recognize the ranking member of the committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Conyers, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte. My colleagues, I am happy to join the chairman, and I think most of you, in support of this measure, H.R. 1428, the Judicial Redress Act. It's good for national security, good for privacy, good for business, and is unquestionably the right thing to do for our nation's closest allies. Under current law, an American citizen is entitled to access and request a correction to personal records held by a federal agency. If the agency denies access or fails to make a requested change or otherwise violates privacy rights, then the citizen may seek redress in federal court. But under current law, these rights are conveyed only to American citizens, not to the citizens of our closest allies, even though many European countries offer citizens similar rights overseas. H.R. 1428 will extend these core privacy protections to the citizens of certain foreign countries, those designated by the Attorney General as trusted allies. This is a matter of basic fairness. Our friends abroad should have some course of redress with respect to information that they provided to the United States government in the first place. In addition, this legislation will facilitate information sharing partnerships with law enforcement agencies across the globe. We know from experience that open lines of communication with our allies yield vital intelligence and save lives. 1428 will enable the United States and the European Union to complete an umbrella agreement to govern information sharing across the Atlantic for law enforcement and counterterrorism forces. This agreement, which includes significant protections for individual privacy, will not go into effect until we have made these changes. And so H.R. 1428 will also benefit American businesses. Earlier this year, a coalition of trade associations and other organizations wrote to the House leadership of both parties to outline the economic costs of, quote, a significant erosion of global public trust in both the United States government and the United States technology sector, end quotation. They conclude that this bill, the Judicial Redress Act, will help restore the public trust necessary for the continued success of United States industry overseas. H.R. 1428 is supported by the White House, the Department of Justice, and several other federal law enforcement agencies. It's been endorsed by organizations like the United States Chamber of Commerce and the Information Technology Industrial Council, as well as businesses like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and IBM. I thank the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for his leadership on this issue. I'm proud to have joined him as a co-sponsor and urge the support of this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair thanks the gentleman and now is pleased to recognize the sponsor of the bill, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I'd like to thank Chairman Goodlatte for holding this morning's markup of the Judicial Redress Act of 2015. I was pleased to introduce this legislation with Ranking Member Conyers in March, and to see the United States and the European Union recently reached an umbrella agreement for the protection of personal data and the sharing of law enforcement information. I am optimistic that we can pass this meaningful legislation that will improve our international relationships, strengthen information sharing between international law enforcement entities, and produce a better environment for U.S. businesses operating abroad. In many ways, the Judicial Redress Act is a privacy bill, backed and supported by many of our country's top Privacy Act advocates. But make no mistake, this bill is also critical to U.S. law enforcement. At the heart of the Judicial Redress Act is the pressing need for continued sharing of law enforcement data. Trust is easily lost and hard to rebuild. As the original author of the USA Freedom Act, I saw firsthand the damage the Snowden leaks did to our international reputation. It is my hope that passage of the USA Freedom Act and the unequivocal end of mass, suspicionless surveillance in the United States was a first step toward normalizing relationships with our allies. But the Judicial Redress Act is an important second step. The bill is essential to the implementation of the recently signed umbrella agreement between the United States and the European Union. In the words of the agreement, quote, the purpose is to ensure a high level of protection of personal information and to enhance cooperation between the United States and the European Union and its member states. in relation to the prevention, investigation, detection, or prosecution of criminal offenses, including terrorism. In our complex digital world, privacy and security are not competing values. They are weaved together inseparably, and today's policymakers must craft legal frameworks that support both. It is a critical issue in today's digital world. The bill provides our allies with limited remedies relative to data they share with the United States, similar to those American citizens enjoy under the Privacy Act. It is a way to support our foreign allies and to ensure the continued sharing of law enforcement data. Specifically, the bill would give citizens of covered countries the ability to correct flawed information in their records and access to U.S. courts if the U.S. government unlawfully discloses their personal information. As American citizens, we already enjoy similar protections in Europe. Granting these rights to our closest allies will be a positive step in restoring our international reputation and rebuilding trust. Our colleagues in Europe have noted that such protections are central to their willingness to continue sharing law enforcement data with the United States. If we fail to pass the Judicial Redress Act, we will undermine several important international agreements, harm our businesses operating in Europe, and severely limit the sharing of law enforcement information. This bill currently enjoys broad support and has been endorsed by the Department of Justice, as well as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and numerous U.S. businesses. I urge my colleagues to support this important legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. For what purpose the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly support this legislation, H.R. 1428, the Judicial Redress Act of 2015, and I appreciate the Chair bringing this bill forward. This bill would expand privacy protections to certain specified foreign nationals under American law. I support this expansion of privacy for non-citizens, but I do remain concerned that the committee has not brought up a number of other important bills that aim to protect the privacy rights of American citizens. I respectfully urge the committee to take action on these bills as soon as possible. The first is EPCA reform. EPCA reform legislation has been pending for 3 years. The Senate has charged ahead on this reform, and I fear we're lagging behind in the House. A number of EPCA reform bills have been referred to this committee, one being sponsored by my friend Ms. Lofgren and myself. There's another one, H.R. 699, that has 229 co-sponsors, the most of any bill in the U.S. House of Representatives. I continue to hear from constituents that are asking Congress to move to fix this outdated EPCA law that permits the government to search Americans' data stored on the cloud without a warrant, and the context is over 6 months old. The law needs to be changed immediately. The longer we delay, the longer the Fourth Amendment rights of Americans are not protected. Even government bureaucrats don't want the law to be fixed. The SEC recently said they should have the right to search emails of Americans without warrants. We have to deal with this matter as well as others. Additionally, I believe that it is time that the committee consider looking at warrantless reverse targeting of American citizens under Section 702 of the FISA Amendment Act. In the past few years, it has come to light that our intelligence agencies have been abusing this section to search for data on American citizens without a warrant. I believe this is a grave abuse of the Fourth Amendment and needs to be stopped. A number of pieces of legislation have been introduced, one along with, once again, my friend Representative Lofgren, to prevent the reverse targeting. H.R. 2233 to end Warrantless Surveillance Act has 42 sponsors, including 12 members of this committee. It's passed the House twice as an amendment on appropriation bills, yet we have not seen action on a standalone bill. And I'd ask the committee to consider this legislation. And also, lastly, I believe we need to address aerial surveillance with drones and fixed-wing aircraft. I understand that all these issues are difficult and complex, but we're dealing with constitutional issues, and it should be a greater concern, in my opinion, that we move forward on Fourth Amendment protections to apply new technology. And it's one of the greatest accomplishments this committee can do in this Congress. And I urge the committee to consider these issues, and I'll yield back, and I thank the chairman.
The chair thanks, gentlemen. If the gentleman would yield, the chair would express his
Certainly, I'll yield.
keen interest in all the bills you described. The first one, ECPA, is a bill that I know a majority of the members of this committee would like to move forward on, and we are actively working on that and looking at the various alternatives, including the two that you described, to find a way forward to move that legislation. And we appreciate the gentleman's interest and his urging.
Thank the chairman. Now yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Are there any amendments to H.R. 1428? A reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion to report the bill H.R. 1428 favorably to the House. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill as amended is ordered reported favorably. Right, it's not amended. The bill is ordered reported favorably, and members will have 2 days to submit views. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 1755 for purposes of markup and move that the committee report the bill favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 1755 to amend Title 36 United States Code to make certain improvements in the Congressional Charter of the Disabled American Veterans.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendments at any point. I'll begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. Since 1920, Disabled American Veterans has been serving American veterans who were wounded in the line of duty. It provides free assistance to veterans and their families in obtaining federal benefits and services earned through military service. It represents the interests of disabled veterans, their families, their widowed spouses, and their orphans before the federal, state, and local governments. And it provides a structure through which disabled veterans can express their compassion for their fellow veterans through a variety of volunteer programs. The organization received a federal charter in 1932. DAV is seeking enactment of H.R. 1755, which will facilitate DAV in its fundraising efforts, as the organization explains. For decades, DAV has been exempt from federal taxation under 501c4 of the Internal Revenue Code. Donations to most 501c4 organizations are not deductible for income or estate tax purposes. DAV is a rare exception, as it qualifies to receive deductible contributions as a war veterans organization. Many donors, even sophisticated donors, believe it incorrectly that charitable deductions are available only for gifts made to a 501c3 organization, more commonly known as a public charity. We believe that this misconception has been limiting DAV's opportunities to gain corporate support and major gifts, including bequests. There is no doubt that DAV's activities of service to wounded and disabled veterans would enable it to qualify as a public charity exempt from taxation under Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. To achieve that designation, the organization needs to make application to the Internal Revenue Service. The application requires that certain language be included in the organization document, which in our case is the federal charter. H.R. 1755 makes explicit DAV's exclusively charitable purpose, explains the educational component of its mission, and mandates the assignment of its assets to the Department of Veterans Affairs in the event of dissolution. Inclusion of these provisions in the charter will simplify greatly our conversion to C3 status. We can help the DAV carry out its vital mission through this legislation. I commend Representative Miller for introducing the bill and urge my colleagues to support it. And now I'm pleased to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Conyers, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte. Members of the committee, H.R. 1755 is a simple bill that makes important improvements to the federal charter of the Disabled American Veterans. The Disabled American Veterans have been serving disabled veterans since 1920. In fact, the organization's first national convention was held in Detroit, Michigan in 1921. Currently, the organization serves our disabled veterans by helping them access all the benefits available to them, fighting for their interests in Washington, D.C., and educating the public about the sacrifices they make. The changes that H.R. 1755 makes are important because they specifically recognize two of the organization's more important missions, educating the public and educating disabled veterans. This bill also specifies that on dissolution or final liquidation of the organization, any assets remaining must be transferred to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs for the care of disabled veterans. As a result of these revisions, the organization's charitable status will be clarified, and accordingly, I urge support of the measure and yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The chair thanks the gentleman. Are there any amendments to H.R. 1755? What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, move to strike last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to have this opportunity today to consider legislation that will make improvements in the Congressional Charter of the Disabled American Veterans. This markup is an opportunity to recognize the sacrifices of our men and women in uniform and thank them for their service to our country. The Disabled American Veterans received its first Congressional Charter in 1932, and today's markup of H.R. 1755 to update and improve the Charter is a sign of the continued strength and commitment to the DAV. The DAV has more than 1.2 million members today, indicating the organization is still an important resource and advocate for our returning service members. I have served alongside men and women in uniform as a chaplain in the U.S. Air Force Reserve, and I've seen firsthand the struggles they endure both on the battlefield and when they return home. It is critical that we work together as a nation to recognize those who fight in our defense of our freedoms and to show them our gratitude for their courage. We can and should do better by those who have served and sacrificed for our nation. Although the problems facing the VA are significant, our resolve to support the veterans is greater still, thus the dedication of the organization, the Disabled American Veterans. When we do this, when we look at what they do and how they support us and how they support the veterans and their needs, they work alongside my office, such as my district office and others, to make sure that veterans have the care that they need and also the access that they deserve. When we look at this bill today, I'm glad to see us looking at this, making sure that we take steps forward to ensure their charter is up to date, and also the commitment of this committee and also this Congress to making sure that we do everything to support those not only in our system, but those who support those who are in need of the system being more suited to them. And for that, I appreciate the chairman and the markup today for the Disabled American Veterans. And with that, I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. For what purposes, gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To strike the last word, I would just like to note that I
Woman is recognized.
think this is an important measure. I agree and would ask unanimous consent to put my written statement in the record.
Without objection, it will be made a part of the record. And are there amendments to H.R. 1755? Being none, a reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion to report the bill H.R. 1755 favorably to the House. Those in favor will respond by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered reported favorably. The members will have 2 days to submit views. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 3449 for purposes of markup and move that the committee report the bill favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 3449, to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act to extend honorary citizenship to otherwise qualified non-citizens who enlisted in the Philippines and died while serving on active duty with the United States Armed Forces during certain periods of hostilities and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point, and I'll begin by recognizing myself for an opening statement. Many Filipinos served bravely with the United States Armed Forces during World War II in the Philippine Scouts. The U.S. Army writes that early in World War II, General MacArthur had his entire army withdraw to the Bataan Peninsula and to Corregidor Island to hold off the Japanese army until the U.S. Navy could bring reinforcements and supplies. The Philippine Scouts, side by side with the U.S. National Guard and Philippine Army infantry units, defeated the Japanese army in numerous actions in the interior and on the coastlines of Bataan. Survivors of the Battle of Bataan, to a man, described the Philippine Scouts as the backbone of the American defense there. President Franklin Roosevelt awarded the U.S. Army's first 3 Congressional Medals of Honor of World War II to Philippine Scouts. By March 1942, the Japanese Army had marched through Southeast Asia and completely overrun every country and island in the Western Pacific, with the exception of the Philippines. The Philippines and MacArthur's army were alone. On the Bataan Peninsula of Luzon Island, the Philippine Scouts, a few U.S. Army National Guard units, and 10 divisions of poorly equipped, almost untrained Philippine Army soldiers held out for 4 months against the Japanese. With the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor in shambles and the Japanese Navy blockading the Philippines, there was no way for America to get reinforcements, food, or medicine to the troops on Bataan. Nonetheless, they held out while malaria, dysentery, and malnutrition ravaged their ranks, and Japanese attacks drove them further down the Bataan Peninsula. Fresh Japanese troops began a crushing attack on the U.S. forces on Bataan April 3, 1942. Although the men fought bravely, the Battle of Bataan ended April 9, 1942, when General Edward King surrendered rather than see any more of his starving, diseased men slaughtered by the advancing Japanese army. At that point, 75,000 men became prisoners of war, about 12,000 Americans and 63,000 Filipinos. What followed was one of the worst atrocities in modern wartime history, the Bataan Death March. America owes a debt of gratitude to those Philippine scouts who gave their lives fighting with the U.S. in World War II. Posthumous citizenship would be a fitting tribute to their sacrifice. Concurrently, the Posthumous Citizenship for Active Duty Service Act does provide a procedure for an alien who is killed while serving on active duty status with the U.S. Armed Forces during periods of hostility to be granted posthumous citizenship. The House report indicated that posthumous citizenship is a symbolic measure to express that the United States honors the memory of the individual who gave their life for our country. That statute provides that an alien is eligible for posthumous citizenship if they, 1, served honorably in an active duty status in the military, air, or naval forces of the United States during any period of hostilities, including World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, or other period of hostilities designated by the President by executive order, including the current War on Terror. 2, died as a result of injury or disease incurred or aggravated by that service, and 3, at the time of enlistment, re-enlistment, extension of enlistment, or induction were 1, in the United States, the Canal Zone, American Samoa, or Swains Island, or on board a public vessel owned or operated by the United States for non-commercial service, whether or not he was a lawful permanent resident, or 2, at any time subsequent to enlistment or induction had become a lawful permanent resident. The Philippine Scouts who lost their lives in World War II do not qualify for posthumous citizenship because they cannot meet this third requirement. Essentially, they did not enlist in the United States and were never permanent residents. Representative Walter Jones has introduced H.R. 3449, which would waive this impediment and finally allow America to honor these men. I commend Mr. Jones for introducing this bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it. And at this time, I'm pleased to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Conyers, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Goodlatte. Members of the committee, 70 years ago, we led the world, in effect, to defeat the fascist Axis powers of Germany and Japan. During World War II, over 250,000 Filipinos fought alongside American forces, and many of them paid the ultimate sacrifice to take back their country during the Japanese occupation. Today, we're marking up a bill that recognizes these brave Filipino soldiers. As one of the 3 remaining Korean War veterans in Congress, I'm pleased to commemorate their service by extending honorary citizenship to these brothers in arms who died while serving on active duty with American Armed Forces during World War II. We should also consider the Filipino Veterans Family Reunification Act introduced by our colleague from Hawaii, Mr. Mark Takai. There are approximately 6,000 Filipino-American World War II veterans still alive in the United States today, and many of them require the care and assistance of their families as they age, and many greatly desire to have their family members in the United States with them during their final days. But even for United States citizens from the Philippines, the waits for family members can be 10 or 20 years due to annual visa quotas. Representative Takai's proposal would exempt children of Filipino World War II veterans from annual visa caps. It is a narrow, sensible, and humane proposal that is consistent with the spirit of the bill we're marking up today, and I'm glad we're coming together to honor Filipinos who served our country in World War II. I urge us to do a bit more on behalf of these Filipino veterans who are part of the greatest generation, and I support the measure, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Are there any amendments? For what purposes, gentleman from California seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will
Mr.
report.
Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
A point of order is reserved, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 3449, offered by Ms. Lofgren of California. Add at the end of the bill the following. Section 2, exemption.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Conyers said in his opening statement, there are approximately 6,000 Filipino-American World War II veterans still alive in the United States today, and they are very anxious to have family members with them in the United States during their final days. They may need the care and assistance of their families as they age. But even for U.S. citizens from the Philippines, the waits for family members under our current visa system can be 10 or 20 years. So this amendment would address these visa backlogs by exempting children of certain Filipino World War II veterans from the annual visa caps. It actually tracks the bill introduced by our colleague, Congressman Takai from Hawaii. It's a narrow measure that recognizes the sacrifice of Filipino veterans and will ensure that they're reunified with their families. And I think it's important that we join together and focus on the families of these World War II veterans from the Philippines who served our country and the world so well. And at this point, I would yield to my colleague from California, Ms. Chu, for a few words.
Thank you, Congressmember Lofgren, for introducing this amendment. Over half a century ago, Filipino soldiers answered the call to arms by President Franklin D. Roosevelt and later fought on behalf of American forces in the Philippines during World War II. Giving posthumous citizenship to those who sacrificed their lives for the U.S. and our values is the right thing to do by these families. However, I don't believe that it's enough. Today, there are as many as 26,000 of these brave soldiers who are living in the U.S., but who cannot reunite with their family. These veterans are U.S. citizens, but because of our extremely backlogged family visa system, many Filipino families are forced to wait over 20 years to reunite. Take the case of Mr. Art Caleta. Over 70 years ago, he helped our military as a guerrilla intelligence officer during World War II. In 1996, Mr. Caleta, a U.S. citizen, petitioned for his 3 sons who live in Manila. Currently, the Department of State is processing applications for 1993. That means Mr. Caleta, now 90 years old, has waited over 22 years for his son's visas and still has to wait several more years until the visas become available. Meanwhile, last year, Mr. Caleta's wife passed away, unable to spend the last years of her life with her children. This is unacceptable. Only comprehensive immigration reform will get to the root of the problem, but Congress should at a minimum ensure Filipino veterans who put their lives on the line for our country are able to reunite with their loved ones. It is our duty to take care of those who fought for this country. This means fully compensating these families that have suffered such long separations from their loved ones. To not do so would be a monumental omission and injustice to the memory of those service members who made the ultimate sacrifice for the freedoms we enjoy today. And that's why I'm a proud co-sponsor of Congressmember Takai's Filipino Veterans Family Reunification Act. H.R. 483, which would exempt the children of Filipino World War II veterans from the visa caps and expedite their path toward citizenship. The bill before us today is the right thing to do, but we must do much more to ensure that veterans like Mr. Kaleda are properly honored and are able to have the most important thing for them, the ability to live out their last years with their children. Thank you, and I'll yield back.
I thank the lady for yielding back. I would just note that this amendment is important because these World War II vets who, given their advanced age, don't have a lot of time left with us will probably not survive long enough for their children to actually come under the visa system. And because they do need the help of their children because of their advanced age, it's urgent that this measure be adopted. And I hope that we might be able to either adopt this amendment or, since it's possible, it may not be germane to the underlying bill, that we might be able to take this measure up separately because of the urgency for these heroic individuals. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Does the gentleman from Wisconsin insist on his point of order?
Yes, I insist on the point of order. The bill is limited in subject matter to the granting of posthumous or honorary citizenship to certain Filipinos who served us in World War II. There are no actual benefits being conferred in this bill since the recipients are deceased. Thus, amendments to confer benefits would be outside the scope and subject matter of the bill, and I would ask the chair to sustain the point of order and yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment given the germaneness issue.
Well, the chair thanks the gentlewoman. Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. And the chair would say to the gentlewoman, there are other bills pending before the committee that we would like to act upon that would help with the situation that you described. So we'll work toward that goal. Are there other amendments to H.R. 3449? Being none, and a quorum being present, a reporting quorum being present, the question is on the motion to report the bill H.R. 3449 favorably to the House. All those in favor respond by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill as amended is ordered reported. The bill is ordered reported favorably. The ayes and members will have 2 days to submit views. That completes the business before the committee today, and the chair thanks all members for attending, and the markup is adjourned.